Okay. Good evening, everybody. Okay, tonight's Wednesday night. It's Halacha and Tanya. So last time we were in the middle of the dinim of what's called Bishul Akum. That means if a guy or pas Akum, Bishul Akum, and if a non-Jew cooks food for you, or bread or things like that. Okay, so now we're up to the concept called Bishul Akum, the cooking of a non-Jew. Okay, so now the din is as follows. In order for it to be considered Bishul Akum, we started this last week, but again, now we're learning the actual laws. In order to be considered Bishul Akum, that you're not supposed to eat, and the reason for that, like we learned, that there shouldn't be an assimilation between the Jews and the non-Jews. So therefore, the Chachamim said that if something cannot be eaten raw, and it's fit for the table of a king, okay? Or like we said last week, it means you would serve it at a banquet. If you would serve it at a banquet, and it's there not only at a banquet, it's there to accompany the bread, meaning as the main course, like the main dish, the meat and something else, or the fish and something else, and it's something that cannot be eaten raw. So then if a guy cooks it from A to Z, you're not allowed to eat that food. Generally speaking, except with a few exceptions, not only are you not allowed to eat the food, you have to kosher the utensils. Utensils also become non-kosher, they have to be kosher. So people have to be careful with this. Now, what exactly does it mean? So we learned already, there's a lot of leniencies. Let's say if something is not cooked, by the way, cooking means cooked, fried, baked, doesn't matter. What happens though, if, okay, you can eat it raw, so again, it doesn't apply. What happens though, if a Jew does something whatsoever in the cooking process, even if they stir it, or they make it higher, the flame, or years ago when the stoves had a pilot light, many people were lenient that because there's a pilot light that the Jew lit, then if a non-Jew turns on the fire, it's an extension of the pilot light, and therefore it would still be considered that a Jew cooked it, and that would be fine. Or technically, this used to go on in certain countries where they had a lot of maids. The women would come Friday morning to the kitchen early in the morning. They would turn on all the fires. They would leave the house, and they came back, and the Shabbos meal was done from A to Z. The housekeepers cooked all the meal, and the Jews turned on the fire, and there wouldn't be a problem. We said last time that Sephardic Jews are more stricter, and they say that it's not enough for a Jew to turn on the fire. The Jew has to put the pot onto the fire. So let's say you have something that's cooked part way by a non-Jew, but a Jew has to finish it because it's not edible as is. So then the din is, because it's not edible as is, the Jew has to finish the cooking process. That's called Bishul Yisrael. That's called the Jew cooked it. Now, last time we were talking about potato chips, and we were discussing that potatoes really are fit for the table of a king. They are served at banquets, but potato chips aren't. So do you look at potato chips, or do you look at potatoes? And we said that most halachically, you can definitely be lenient to eat potato chips that have a hechsher, even if it's not Bishul Yisrael. A lot of people are strict about Bishul Yisrael. According to many opinions, a lot of these cooked things today are not actually cooked, but they're steamed. So again, because they're steamed, it's not cooked, and therefore many people are lenient also in a lot of these things, like beans. A lot of times the canned beans, they're not cooked, they're steamed as in the process, and steaming is not called cooking because the Chacham said cooking, baking, frying, and not steaming. But now you got other, I'll give you interesting questions. Is coffee that a non-Jew made, is coffee Bishul Akum? And the halacha, there's a lot of discussion in it. The halacha is it's not. It's not a problem of a guy turning on the fire. If a guy heats up water, it's not a problem because water you could drink raw. And therefore, when a guy cooks water or coffee or tea or even chocolate, there's a discussion halacha. Chocolate is cooked from the coffee bean. Why isn't? And they really they all hold that chocolate there's no problem with Bishul Akum. In addition to the fact that the reality is you don't serve chocolate. Maybe you have candies on the table, chocolates on the table, but it's not there. The lapis by the sapas. It's not there to accompany the bread. Meaning, it's not the main meal. It's not the meal that you're actually eating. But now you have a question, like say they discuss, let's say, what happens if you have, let's say, cereals. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have oatmeal cereal, okay? Now, oatmeal cereal, even if it was cooked before, instant oatmeal, I'm saying, in the process. But nevertheless, you can't eat raw oatmeal like that, or the instant oatmeal. You have to put it into water and hot water and you cook it a little bit. So again, you're adding something to the cooking process. That's no problem whatsoever. Par-baked bread, let's say, that's baked part way and you have to finish baking it. Again, there's no problem because you're doing it. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have, I'm not advertising any particular company, like the tradition soups, right? They have these soups and you have to add hot water to it and you let it sit for a few minutes. That again is not an issue because even if, let's say, the noodles are what par cooked, but the fact is it's not edible as is, and therefore you have to make it edible by putting hot water into it. So again, you're doing the cooking process. But you have, and we just touched it last week, you have we're not talking about mavoshel wine yet. When we get to mavoshel wine, we'll talk about wine. Now we're talking about cooking, not about wines. Now if I was game. Okay, so now you have, let's say, those soups is not an issue that you have to add something to it, or like, okay, whatever. So now what happens if you have, let's say, cereal, Kellogg's Post cereals? Okay, and some of them might even be a mazenis if there's wheat flour in it. So is there an issue with that? So a lot of poskim talk about it, and the general consensus is it's not a problem at all because number one, it's not edible for a table of a king. You don't serve it at a banquet. Secondly, you don't eat it plain. You always have to add milk to it. It's made to add milk. So therefore, it's not a food by itself that would be the problem of Bishul Akum or cooking of a non-Jewish person. But you have to be careful because sometimes in the house, people have maids and the maids cook meals. Now, that's a very big problem. So if you're talking about reheating meals, that is not a problem. Why is reheating meals not a problem? Because you already cooked it. So they're just reheating it, but you did the main process. So you were very involved in the actual process of the meal. So then it wouldn't be a problem with Bishul. In fact, when you have these TV dinners, as they're called, or the airline dinners, okay? You travel on a non-Jewish airline, and the people there are not Jewish, and they're bringing you their heated meal. So why is that good? Why isn't that Bishul Akum? Why isn't that cooking of a non-Jew? Because again, all they're doing is reheating it. So somebody has to be very careful in their house, by the way. If a non-Jewish maid or housekeeper, whatever, is going to take raw meat, raw chicken, or raw fish and bake it or cook it for you, it's a big halachic problem. You're not allowed to eat it. Why? Because they cooked it from A to Z. Now, if you turned on the fire and they cooked it, then it's fine. Or you did something in the cooking process, then it would be fine. But otherwise, now in Shulchan Aruch, it's a different. Shulchan Aruch says an interesting din that doesn't apply today. It says in Shulchan Aruch In Shulchan Aruch it says that if somebody has a maid in the house, you're allowed to eat the food because it's for sure that a Jewish person did something in the kitchen. But that was in those days when the women were constantly in the kitchen. So anything that was going on, they would stir or do something. Nowadays, the women are not in the kitchen. So if your housekeeper cooks your meal from A to Z, it's a problem of eating. And then also the dishes are, the pots and pans are a problem. Not the dishes necessarily, but the pots and pans would have to be kosher. So these are issues that you need to keep in mind. Now, there's another issue, which is a very common issue with people that are Bali Tshuva, and they want to go home to their families to eat, and they trust the kasher. I don't remember if I said this last week or not. And they want to kasher, they want to eat, and the parents are kosher, but the parents are not Shemer Shabbos, and they're turning on the fires. Is that an issue? And the halacha is that's not an issue. I mean, there's no argument about it. But practical halacha today, it's not an issue. Number one, people don't have a din real of a machalo Shabbos. They don't have a din of a real desecrator of Shabbos. They're called tinik shenish, but they just don't understand. They don't know. And secondly, the whole reason why you can't have Bishul Akum is because you might intermarry. But you're allowed to intermarry with the daughter of a Machalo Shabbos. So again, all those things wouldn't be a major issue at all. Eggs would be a problem of Bishul Akum. If your non-Jewish maid or a housekeeper made you a fried egg from A to Z, turning on the fire, and you can't do it. You can't eat it. So I was teaching in the high school. A girl asked me an interesting question. What happens if the non-Jew is cooking for herself in your pots? Kosher food, obviously. She's not bringing you a tray for food, but she's not cooking for you. She's cooking for herself. She wants to make a piece of chicken, okay? So in your pot, she turns on the fire, she cooks the chicken or bakes the chicken, and she's eating it. Now, is that a problem with the kalim? Do the pots become a problem? And the answer is yes, it's a problem, because the fact is the non-Jew cooked in your pots. Yeah, she's cooking for herself. It doesn't matter who she's cooking for. So I told them what they really should do, and you have to be very, very careful with this because you can't always trust them. If she wants to cook and you don't mind her cooking for herself in the house, designate one pot that's hers, only hers. Nobody else uses it. And she cooks for herself with her pot, with your food. Now, she can bring in non-kosher food. That's a massive issue. But then, because then your kitchen's straight. But she's doing it on your food and your pot, but you designate it for her. She keeps it separate. So then that would be fine. But you have to keep in mind that you go to places, if goyim are cooking, it's a very big problem. And therefore, in the restaurants, you need a very good mashgiach, a very good supervisor, because a lot of times, and I've seen this myself, a lot of times in the restaurants, they're not careful. So a lot of times the fires go out, pots overflow, the fire goes out. So a mashgiach has to relight the fire. And you have to make sure that the mashgiach is rekindling the fire, not the worker in the back over there that's going to light the fire, and then you have a shaila bishul akum. So these things you have to be extremely, extremely careful about in all these things to make sure that it's done properly and it's done good and so on. Now you also have, I'll give you another example of this before we move on. You have pie crusts. People buy pie crusts, finished ones, and then you put the pie filling or whatever food you put into it, and you bake it in the oven. Now, there's two types of pie crusts. You look in the store, some say ready to eat. That means that pie crust, again, even if it has an OU, okay, it doesn't mean that it's not Bishul Akum. It could be paspalta, okay, because the bakery did it, mass production. But if you think about it, if it's ready to eat and it's a crust, that crust is mezainis. That means a goy baked it. If it's not ready to eat, there's some that are not ready to eat. You have to bake it for another 10 minutes just to make the crust edible. Then there's no issue, because again, you're doing something in the baking process or the cooking process. Otherwise, it's a very big problem, and you have to be careful with it. Okay, that's as far as Bishul Akum, Pas Akum in a nutshell. The next din over here in the same chapter of Halacha is Cholav Yisrael and Cholav Akum. Now the Mishnah says, the Mishnah in Chulin says, Cholav shel chalboi Akum ve'en Yisrael re'eu. Milk that was milked by a non-Jew and a Jew did not see the milking process, you're not allowed to drink the milk. It's a Mishnah, it's a din in Shulchan Aruch. In Halacha, it's called Cholav Akum. Cholav means milk, Akum that was milked by a non-Jewish person. You're not allowed to drink that milk. In Shulchan Aruch, it says, not only are you not allowed to drink the milk, if such milk was cooked in your pots are not kosher, and you have to kosher the pots. This is what it says in Shulchan Aruch, okay? Not only that, according to Halacha, the Jew has to be there at the beginning of the milking and make sure the machinery or the vats or even the machinery that the milk goes into are clean and no other things in there. Now, some people say, and that's the simple reason, what's this? Why is Cholav Akum, as we're going to call it, milk of a non-Jew, why is it non-kosher? The Chum were afraid they're going to mix in milk from a non-kosher animal. Okay? We know the din in Shulchan Aruch, which is a very important din for people to know. Offshoots of a kosher animal are kosher, offshoots of a non-kosher animal are not. So, for instance, eggs from a chicken are kosher. Chicken's kosher, the eggs are kosher. Ostrich eggs, or any bird that's not kosher, their eggs are not kosher. It's an offshoot of a treifa animal. The animal's treif, the eggs are treif. Milk of a kosher animal is kosher. Milk of a non-kosher animal, like pig, camel, or whatever, any other treifa animal, is not kosher. So Chazal, this is simply the reason. So Chazal say, why can you not drink Cholav Akum, the milk that was milked by a non-Jew? We're afraid they're going to mix pig's milk into the milk, and then you're drinking treif. They'll mix them together. And as we know in history, these things did happen. So that's the din as it is, as we say in cold-blooded halacha. Cold-blooded halacha is milk that was milked by a non-Jew, and a Jew didn't see the milking, is not kosher. Therefore, the cheeses are not kosher, and the creams are not kosher, the ice creams are not kosher. It's called Cholav Akum. Later on, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein came up with a massive heter, but a really big heter that is accepted by kashrus organizations, by masses of people, and even though they misuse this heter, and we're going to discuss Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's heter. We said before that the simple reason the Gemara says, why is Cholav Akum not kosher? Because we're afraid they're going to mix in pig's milk. So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein writes that now in America, that there's government supervision, and there's FDA approval, whatever it is, and the government makes sure that they don't mix pig's milk into it. And because if they do, they're going to get a massive fine. And therefore, they want to say that Moshe Feinstein is Mekel, that today, but listen what he says. And people misuse the setter. The Moshe Feinstein says in a place where you cannot get Cholav Yisrael, or if somebody's sick and they must have this non-Cholav Yisrael, let's say somebody said they need insure. Okay, insure is OU, but it's not Cholav Yisrael. So they're sick and they need it, so then you're allowed to drink it. Or if you can't get Cholav Yisrael, you're allowed to drink it. But if you look at his response, he writes, but in a place where there is Cholav Yisrael, really you can't, again, people misuse this heter. He says you can't really use the Cholav Akum milk because you can get Cholav Yisrael. And again, what is the heter? The heter is because there's government regulations and with big fines, so now people are not going to mix pig's milk. By the way, which is very clear, and people need to know this, that heter applies only in America where there is government regulations. If you go to another country where there are no government regulations with big fines, there is no heter in the world to drink non-Cholav Yisrael milk, even if you can't get it. The only heter is because there's government supervision, and there'll be a big fine if they don't listen to it. So therefore, they're afraid to do it, and that's what they'll do. So therefore, according to many opinions today, Cholav Yisrael is not mandatory; it's a chumrah, and therefore you wouldn't have to kosher the kelim and things like that. In our circles, we're very, very fanatic about drinking only Cholav Yisrael. And the Rebbe explains an interesting point in these rabbinic decrees that people have. And the Rebbe says like this: there are certain decrees the Chachamim made when the rabbis instituted these decrees. At the time they gave the decree, they said the reason for the decree. Why are we making it? Because, like we said before, you should intermarry. So therefore, if intermarriage is not going to be an issue because they're Jewish, it might not apply. But there's certain other decrees, the Rebbe said, that the Chachamim, when they gave it out, did not say the reason. They didn't say the reason for it. A year later, they gave out the reason for the decree. Then the Rebbe says the halacha is that even if the reason doesn't apply, it's still, the decree still stays. And Cholav Akum is one of those types of decrees that the reason came out later. According to Chassidus, Cholav Akum is metame, impurifies the intelligence, the seichel, the intelligence of the head. So again, there are people that have had tatum today to use Cholav Akum. I'm not saying, God forbid, anybody that doesn't keep Cholav Yisrael is not keeping kosher. In fact, the Rebbe did tell the OK that they should give a hechsher on a non-Cholav Yisrael because these people are eating kosher, and there is a leniency of somebody that says you can drink today in America non-Cholav Yisrael. So therefore, the Rebbe wanted, but as a rule, in our circles, not only do we hold you're not allowed to drink Cholav Akum, we also hold that you have to kosher the kelim from non-Cholav Yisrael to Cholav Yisrael. So let me explain another interesting thing. Sometimes in the cheeses, you'll see the expression koshered at 212. You'll see that on the koshered at 212 degrees. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to start it today because I don't know if I'll finish it or I'm going to go to Tanya. When you kosher the kelim, okay, there's two opinions in halacha. If something, normally we learn when we're learning the laws of Pesach, the way it became treif, that's the way you kosher it. It came treif with fire, you kosher with fire. It came with liquid, you do go with liquid. So there are opinions that hold if it became not kosher, let's say, at 150 degrees, then you can kosher it at 150 degrees because it went in with 150 degrees of heat. Then you kosher it 150 degrees. Other opinions, including the Alter Rebbe, hold no. Even if it became treif with anything over 110 degrees, Yatzel Letizbei, you still need to kasher it at boiling level. Now, boiling level at sea level, what level does water boil at sea level? At 212 degrees at sea level. So your pressure could be higher, lower, depends if you're above sea level, below sea level, whatever. Now the problem is like this. Most Cholav Yisrael places don't have their own farms. There are a few companies that do, most of them don't. So what do? They go into a non-Cholav Yisrael company, okay, they make up a deal with them, and they kosher all the equipment, and then they make the Cholav Yisrael. That's the way it works in most places. The problem is the pasteurizer that pasteurizes the milk gets up to 180 degrees. That's the heat of pasteurization. So many opinions say, okay, they got trait, so to speak, cholav akum at 180 degrees. We're going to kasher it at 180 degrees. And many opinions say that's fine. Other opinions say no, even though it became cholav akum at 180 degrees, but the other opinion says you have to kasher it at 212. If you have to kasher it at 212, the pasteurizer only gets up to 180. So in order to kasher pasteurizer at 212, they have to add certain other equipment to it to make it be able to go up to 212. So that's an issue that we're going to continue next week, but this is the issue now. I know at the beginning of the class it was a little rushed. Tonight's class, first of all, I had a yahrzeit from my mother today, 15th yahrzeit from my mother, Chabad Bas Shmaya. So the class is in her memory. And also for Shlema, for Sholem Dober and Rochel Bela should have the full Shlema. So the class is for my mother's yahrzeit and for the full Shlema for Sholem Dober and Rochel Bela should have immediate to the four.
Amen.
So we go to Tanya.